We are live. Good afternoon. I'm Bob Leeser with Tulsa Global Alliance. Welcome and thank you for joining us for this afternoon's presentation on street school in Greenland. I hope you're all doing well and staying healthy. Tulsa Global Alliance builds global community by working with the City of Tulsa to manage exchanges and activities between Tulsa and its 8 international sister cities, which are San Luis Potosi, Mexico, Kaohsiung, Taiwan, Beihai, China, Tiberias, Israel, Utsunomiya, Japan, Zelenograd, Russia, Celle, Germany, and Amiens, France. And 2020 marks the 40th anniversary of the Sister City program in Tulsa. TGA also hosts participants in the U.S. State Department International Visitor Leadership Program, and we promote international business and global education. This is our second virtual talk, and we hope you'll enjoy hearing about how citizen diplomacy has brought together educators from Tulsa's street school and from Greenland. We're very honored today to have Dr. Lori McGinnis Madland, Executive Director at Street School, to talk with us about her visit to Greenland in 2018 to make presentations at schools about street school's experience with educators there. In 2017, she and Street School hosted the Ministry for Education, Culture, Research, and Ecclesiastical Affairs for a visit to Street School, and a year later she received an invitation from Greenland inviting her to visit the country for a week to take part in an educational conference and share best practices on alternative education. Lori began her career as a special education teacher many years ago, she says. After teaching for 11 years, she had the opportunity to begin the first alternative education program for Sand Springs Public Schools. She left Sand Springs to work for an organization that helped school districts with their programs for at-risk youth. And she was afforded numerous opportunities to present at the national and state levels about best practices for at-risk youth. In 2003, she became the president and CEO for Street School, and she's led the program to national as well as international acclaim. She's very grateful to work where her passion lies, and Street School, just so everyone knows, is a nonprofit alternative education and counseling program that transforms lives by building healthy minds, creating opportunities, and preparing students for the future. We'll be recording today's talk and we'll post it to YouTube and Facebook later. And if you have questions for Lori after she finishes her presentation, you can write them in the chat function. Lori, we're very excited to hear from you today.
Thank you, Bob. We're finally up and running, so that's great. So yes, as Bob said, you never know when your paths are going to cross with someone again, and never did I dream that after meeting the representatives from Greenland that I would be making the trip there. The reason that they chose Street School initially was because they were very concerned about their at-risk youth and families. They have a 67% dropout rate in Greenland, and their suicide rate is 6 times that of the United States. You may be wondering why that is. I make my best guesses after being there, and we'll talk about that later on in the presentation. But obviously, I decided I couldn't possibly pass up on this opportunity. They made all the travel arrangements. I gathered up the warmest clothes I could find, and in October, the average temperature was around 20 degrees Fahrenheit for us, and it's close to the water, so it was some of the coldest cold I think I've experienced ever, possibly. But I read up on all things Nuuk and prepared as best I could, and it really was the experience of a lifetime. And it was pretty exciting. So as an aside, one of the participants approached me and to tell me that he had heard of Tulsa in Oklahoma, and I was a little surprised by that. But the world gets smaller and smaller, and part of that was thanks to the show Friends, because he remembered when Chandler had transferred to Tulsa, and then he was also a big fan of the Oklahoma City Thunder. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I've broken this presentation up into themes, if you will. And so I started out by flying in from the US to the Keflavik airport in Iceland. And to get to Greenland, you either go through Denmark or Iceland, and they routed me that way. So the Keflavik airport has lots of art, lots of things to look at. It's very small, but really interesting. So this was a jet nest, and it symbolizes the wing of a jet hatching out of an egg. Thought it was pretty interesting. Some artwork in the airport. this was funny. You know, you can get everything you need in the Keflavik Airport. Down at the bottom left corner, you'll see some meat. Well, you'll see the meat over there. Those are legs of lamb. I just never have seen a leg of lamb that you could buy in the airport. So I guess anything and everything you might need was there. Another thing we don't usually see here, or we never see here, is reindeer fur. And you'll see the Danish, or no, it's the Icelandic krona, 15,500, and that translated to about 2,300 US dollars at that time. And so you can see that was on sale. These are just inside of the airport there, the wooden slat seats, which were quite comfortable, but just very clean and nice, well organized, and a child's play area there. So that was pretty interesting. It was very nice because I landed at the airport at about 7:40 our time, or 7:40 their time, but it was about just almost 3 o'clock our time, 3 a.m. And they had arranged for me to have a place at the, a room rather, at the hotel at the airport, which was really nice. So I could regroup, rest, take a nap, because my flight didn't leave until later that evening. So here I am on my flight. It took me a minute to, there was some construction, and I got a little nervous because I couldn't find where this gate was, and I kept looking and looking, and I walked around the corner, and someone came in. I'd been watching, and she came in and she said, "Are you going to Greenland?" And I thought, well, do I look like that? Yes, I am. And so she grabbed me up and she said, "We've got to get on this bus, your plane's leaving." And I thought, oh my goodness, you know. And then she told me that usually they don't fly from Iceland to Greenland if there are less than 2 people on the flight, but the other person didn't show up. So for the first time in my life, I flew completely by myself on this plane. So here I am. The flight attendant did some knitting. She didn't bother with any of the safety protocol. I guess she figured, you know, why. Here we were. So I thought we were flying directly into Nuuk, but as the pilot came out and talked to me about our first stop, here he is, the pilot, co-pilot, and I was able to fly in the jump seat for the landing. So something that you would never really get to do in the United States, but it was a lot of fun. What would have made it even more fun is if it had been in the daytime to see all of the landscape below, but that was really quite an experience. So even though I was the only person on this airline, we landed first in Kalusik, and Kalusik is an old Air Force base that the Americans built during World War II, and we were there to pick up about 33 other people. And I thought, where in the world did they come from? I thought, where are their cars? This is the way we travel. How did they get there? And so what I learned was, because of these settlements and the remoteness of how people lived there, they helicopter in, and then they were all heading to Nuuk. So I met this gentleman, and he was very excited to show me this polar bear claw. And before I went over there, I read that the polar bear in some of the settlements, that could be anywhere from 300 to about 1,000, so they're very small, that if someone kills a polar bear, then they are really revealed as a hero, and that many people in the settlement can eat for a very long time. So it's quite a big deal to be able to kill a polar bear. So it was interesting because the flight attendant said, you can leave your things, but take your passport because you'll need that to get, you know, back on the plane. And that gave me a little bit of a chuckle, really, because I thought, okay, I'll do that, but I think you recognize me. But anyway, follow the rules. Here's the airplane that I flew in, and then flew in from Iceland and then back to into Nuuk. And just as a reminder, Nuuk is the capital of Greenland, and the population in Nuuk is about 17,000. And so the whole population of Greenland is around 40, maybe as much as 50,000, but it's a very densely populated or lightly populated country. So my first day in Nuuk was October 25th, and I must say that they told me how they really aren't planners. And that began to make sense to me because they contacted me at the beginning of October to ask if I would make a presentation. And I thought, well, they must mean October of the next year, so they're really planning ahead. And then I quickly found out, no, they really wanted me to be there in about 2.5 weeks. And I thought, wow, okay, I can do this. I can make this happen. So my first day in the hotel, which you'll see some pictures of, it's a very Danish breakfast. I always like to hear about the food myself, but lots of cheeses, cold cuts, breads, jams, and then heartier things like bacon and eggs. And I was pretty nervous about the day because I wasn't sure what to expect. In fact, we had many conversations about their expectations from me, and I did put the PowerPoint together, but I wasn't even clear that they wanted me to make a presentation until right before I was leaving. So in the, so just a couple of the pictures of me presenting here and some of the work groups. So they asked me to come to inspire the work groups to complete their projects. And you know, you've got to love the differences in language and culture, but I thought, okay, I'll get over there and motivate some people to complete their projects, but I wasn't really sure what they'd been working on, what the intent was, but go forward and do that. So you can see, here's a fellow from one of the work groups, and these are people who are working with schools all around Greenland, and then they were able to come together and talk about some of those things that they were doing. So they are in the midst of some huge systemic change. They follow the Danish model of education, where students complete school at grade 10, and then they go into, if they want to, what's called a gymnasium or a GUX for 2 years prior to going on into college. And that's all funded by the government for them. But if they don't want to do that, there's not a lot of opportunity after. So when this group came to the United States, they were very interested in not only hearing about what we do with our dropouts and with the counseling component that we have, but they also visited some vocational programs because they're very interested in looking at some of the American models of education, and then as they feel that the Danish model isn't really serving them as well as they feel like that something different could be. So it was interesting that as I was here, you can see how many people were there and had the headphones on for the interpreters. At the very back of this picture, you'll see the booth. So there was a man who was just there for me. So he was translating Greenlandic and Danish to English, and there was another translator who was translating for if somebody was presenting in Greenlandic to people who would speak Danish or English. And it's interesting because what I learned there are a lot of people who are there working that are from Denmark, and they'll spend 2 or 3 years there as educators, counselors, or in whatever capacity they're serving, and then some certainly would stay and live there. But so there is a lot of inconsistency within their system, and they realize that. But there are kind of 2 schools in Greenland. You can go to a school that really predominantly speaks Greenlandic, or one that predominantly speaks Danish. And for the Danish, they're also learning English. Greenlandic was interesting to meet those people because they spoke Greenlandic and they might speak Danish, but they don't speak any English. But if you ever opt to go to Greenland, and you're more than likely be in Nuuk, then you'd feel very comfortable because most of the people there that you're encountering speak English, and things are written that way. It's pretty easy to navigate and figure out. But back to the presentation. So the presentation that day was running a little long, as they can with the work groups. And I found it interesting because I got through my presentation, but they said there wasn't any time for Q&A. And I found it really curious that to go to the expense to fly me there and to have purpose to learn about about our program and how there are aspects of it that could be modeled, but then not to make any time for Q&A. So at lunch, I sat with some Danish teachers, and we talked, and it was really a good conversation, and I learned a lot about some of the obstacles that they face. But for those who spoke Greenlandic, there was just a real barrier there. And so we weren't able to communicate. There wasn't a translator available after that first day. And so I had a lot of time on my own. They told me since I wouldn't have a translator for the next day, I would just be on my own for that day and for the weekend, and I would see them at lunch. So it was pretty loose, and I thought, okay, I can go with the flow. So the hotel was centrally located, and I had a great view, which was really wonderful. As I was getting kind of the lay of the land, I could really see out over all of the community there. But I do want to show you some of the things from the store. So there was a grocery store slash ready-to-wear slash home decor slash bookstore kind of area across from the hotel, and you can see one of the real open-air salad bars, which was a little too open for me, for sure, but a lot of fresh produce there. Interestingly, I found it interesting how much things cost there, because the pineapples and the melons ended up to be around $7 each. And I wondered how people were able to really afford that. It's all, of course, imported from Denmark predominantly, and then a lot from Sweden and Holland. Some of their more ethnic food, like some of the Mexican meals, were from Sweden and Holland, which gave me a little chuckle, I guess. But things were really pretty expensive. So I broached with them. I was curious about how much an average person made. I certainly wasn't asking that individual how much they made. And I know that people get real nervous talking about money, but these bags, for example, were around $5, $6 per bag for that produce. But I got zero information. They would not discuss it. It wasn't a shutdown. It wasn't anything uncomfortable, but it was just, they weren't going to talk about that. And I found that kind of curious, because I didn't want to say, how much do people make here? Because things are really expensive. So I take this picture of this Kendall Jackson wine, because this is something that we find here with frequency. I mean, you certainly now in the grocery stores and so forth. And I read that if you wanted to have some wine, then you should buy it at the duty-free shop before you get into Greenland, because the wine's very expensive. So I did that, and I brought a bottle in with me. And I was really glad I did, because this Kendall Jackson ended up to be $40 there, and it's about $12 in our stores here. So it gives you kind of an idea. They do have a real problem with alcoholism there. And I know that several of the people I talked to didn't like that there was now the ability to buy wine in the stores. They didn't like it to be where children could see it, and had some real feelings about things that way. So here is my room. I never take a picture of my hotel room when it's pristine. This is just lived in, so you can see it's very small. And you might think, oh my gosh, I'd be claustrophobic in there. But oddly not. Now the window looks over the whole city. So that's what I mean. It was really nice. The room was very comfortable. I know the bed looks like it's just maybe an inch of some kind of foam mattress, but it was really, really very comfortable. And I actually had plenty of room. There was a small closet and some other storage and plenty of room. And then the bathroom was very efficient, not a lot of place to put things, and then a shower still in there. So I always think these kinds of things are kind of fun to see. The other thing that gave me a chuckle was that here was a Big Bang Theory, and it was being translated from English into Danish. So, you know, world is smaller. This is the outside of the hotel, and the hotel's name is the Hans, and it's Egede, and I honestly just cannot remember how to pronounce that. It's not sounding it as it looks, but he was a man who was a Lutheran minister. The religion is Lutheran there, and it is very metropolitan looking and very nice hotel. This is some of the inside of that. There is a lot of honor to the Inuits and to animals. I will say that these people are a hardy people, and they would just have to be. it is, you know, Greenland is 80% of Greenland is ice capped. And I don't know about anybody out there listening, but I am not graceful on the ice. So I really researched a good pair of boots to take with me. And I'm happy to report I never slid down one time. I slid, but I never fell down. It was just ice chunks walking around there. Lots of crazy snow. And a lot of times I felt like I was in a Hallmark movie, like in the middle of a snow globe, because of the way that the snow would be. And it was just had some real beauty, which you'll see. But I marvel at this mother navigating this walker. And you can just kind of get an idea of the hustle and bustle of daily life. You'll see some people down there selling their goods on the ground. Other people come in, going, working, shopping. They did have a transit system there. This person using a walker in all of this ice. This was the restaurant in the hotel, and it was called the Hereford Beef Stew restaurant. And this is really where I ate the majority of my meals. There would be a breakfast buffet in the morning, obviously, and then also a lunch buffet. And then at night, the menu was predominantly meat. I don't know when I've eaten so much. I like some beef, but I don't know when I've eaten so much beef in one place. I kind of expected maybe more seafood and that sort of thing, but I didn't branch out and try the reindeer. And there was another restaurant that they treated me to lunch in one day, and they did have whale on the menu. And I guess I'm just not that adventurous, so I didn't try that. So this was a really neat little cultural experience I had. I was invited by Luna Mueller, who was one of the persons that invited me to come over, to attend what's called a Kaffemik. It's Kaffemik. And a Kaffemik is a celebration of a special event. And this was to celebrate her friend's daughter's 15th birthday. And it's really interesting because they do this huge food spread and have, you know, drinks, and it's a festive time, and it's a come and go event. So as more people come in, others leave to make room for those people. And her name was Carla, and I brought some different things from Oklahoma, and I read some candy that they don't typically have. So I brought her some candy and some other related items that I just thankfully happened to have. But it was really nice to be able to be in someone's home to actually see what life is like there. So their living, dining, kitchen, kind of open space there, you'll see. And you'll notice, well, I will point out that there aren't any fireplaces. Even though it's so cold, you think a fireplace is just what, you know, you would want to have, but no trees grow in Greenland because it's just that frozen. It's an ice cap. So there aren't any trees, and everything, from what I understand, is all electric. So some of the house decor that they have to celebrate their culture. This overlooks this big body of water that I'm not sure what the name would be. But if you look out on beyond, you'll see some kind of colorful buildings, and those are apartment buildings and different housing for people there. This is the Nuuk Center, and it's 10 stories. It's the tallest building in Nuuk, and the bottom 2 floors are the mall. So when I heard there was a mall, I thought, well, I've got to get to the mall and see what this is all about. And so there were a few things there. I made my way, and you can see there was one escalator, and much like here, that escalator was not working, so that was all right. So I spent some time there, and interestingly, I ran into people that I'd met at the conference because it is small. They live there. I mean, some people certainly were coming in from the settlements, but it was really fun to run into them and have some more conversations. There's a craft store, and then also a gift store, different items, some seal skin, and then on beyond that is some musk ox skin. And that musk ox skin would cost about $1,000. I'm not sure about the seal skin. So I have some pictures of how beautiful Nuuk is, and but I snagged this picture from the internet because it gives a really beautiful viewpoint from the water, and you can see all these colorful houses. It's just really a beautiful, beautiful place. And I just couldn't really get enough of that. It was really beautiful to walk around. And I have to say, you know, when the temperature was about 20, 23 degrees, I never would walk, I wouldn't walk up to the corner sprouts from my house in that weather, but that's just how I was going to get around, and I bundled up and went out and did it. So it's just really beautiful. One thing that I learned was that many, many moons ago, only the wealthy painted their homes yellow, and that was because the red paint, if you will, was used from a more common substance. But of course, that's different now, but it really made for a beautiful landscape. There was so much sculpture and art within Nuuk, but I wasn't able to really find out what a lot of it symbolized, except for this one was kind of their most famous, and it's called the Mother of the Sea. And it's kind of interesting. The story is that she became angry at the Inuits' evil deeds and gathered up all of the animals that they hunted in her fiery hair at the bottom of the sea. And then there was someone called the Blind One that came down to kind of fix the situation, and he combed her hair, set all the animals free or alive again. And so that honors that myth, the Mother of the Sea. One thing I learned when I was there, I always knew about kayaks. I've seen kayaks and they look fun, but I couldn't get enough of these by the water. They were just so beautiful. And then I learned that the Inuits invented the kayak, and people come from all over the world in the summer to kayak. You know, it gets to be about a balmy 50 or 55 degrees in the summer. So apparently a lot of people do that. They kayak to some of those other small settlements. I love this picture. It was one of my favorite scenes. I just spent a lot of time down here. It was just beautiful. This building had been the original hospital. I'm not sure what it's used for now. I never saw anybody coming or going, but it certainly is well maintained, but just a really pretty fantastic place to be. This area is the main shopping area with standalone shops, if you will. But you can see how icy. Those roads stayed that icy. I mean, it doesn't get warm enough to melt anything off. So it was just really icy to navigate. But navigated I did because there was shopping to be had. The building that's just beyond, that's kind of wavy, that's designed to kind of be a memorial to the Aurora Borealis. And that's a convention center. They would have concerts, movie theaters there, and it's a general gathering for the community there. This is the Nuuk Mountain, and it's I think some people try to climb that. I don't get it, but anyway, sometimes for some people. This is the University of Greenland. And this was pretty interesting because, as I mentioned about seal, and they're not, you know, whacking baby seals over the head. They don't have the baby seals there, but seals really sustain the Inuits, and they use every part of the animal. So these are drying racks, and up here you'll see it closer how they have the seal skins that are drying there. But everybody wears seal boots, seal coats, seal bags, seal everything. It covers benches, and it's in offices on chairs. It's very cold, and so they're using that for warmth and using all of that. This is the Nuuk Cathedral, and it's a Lutheran church, and where Luna Mueller I'd mentioned, she and her family attend there. And it was built entirely of wood between 1848 and 1849. It was quite beautiful. I was able to go inside. It was quite beautiful. And then on beyond is the Greenland National Museum and Archives. This would really be worth looking at some things online. So it's the Greenland National Museum and Archives. And I've got a couple of pictures of sample uniforms or fancy dress. These are very typical and from many years ago, but also current today for dress that for special events and that sort of thing that they would wear. And I saw several women in town wearing this, the one with the kind of red with the white boot over on the far left in town. So it was really neat to see. They're quite beautiful. And this would be an example of how a bedroom in one of the settlements might look. Now, I will say that there was a really interesting exhibit. I didn't put the pictures in this because it can be off-putting for people, and it was really interesting. And it was in the museum, it's called a grave chamber, and they actually have about 3 or 4 bodies, and that have I don't want to use the word mummified, but are kind of like that they have on display. And it was really interesting, and the story about how that came to be, and the story that the people there feel like that they were greedy and ended up kind of in the situation that they were based on their lifestyle and ideals. It was kind of interesting. So, but it can be kind of gruesome, so I didn't add that in, but it's interesting. So if you're interested, you can see that online easily enough. This was the Nuke Local Museum. So the National Museum is more a museum like we would see in the United States. You know, it's very organized, sealed. The displays are done a certain way. The local museum is a little different than that, as you can see. They certainly have different examples and things up to see, and it was interesting, but it's just very different than the National Museum. Here was an Inuit family, and there was somebody, the man in the middle was Danish that married into this family. There's a lot of intermarrying between the Danes and the Inuits there. This is another viewpoint of all the apartment buildings that are going up and that are housing people there. I found this real interesting. So this building that is in the middle of being built, it's being planned for women that are moving from the settlements. So what I was learning is that as women in these settlements learn that there is kind of more out there for them, Nuke is preparing for, I don't want to say a population explosion, but certainly an increase as these women want to leave the settlements. So they have had a lot of conversation what those settlements will look like, because by and large it's hunters and fishermen and families, and they do pretty well, but it's very rural, it's very rustic, and I think that with what I've learned about the alcoholism, not so much the drug abuse because they don't really have that there, but the alcoholism, the sexual and physical abuse, that these women are looking for something different. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch what happens in Greenland, because I think it's a country that's going to go through some huge systemic change. It will take a little bit of time, as that kind of change does. On a lighter note, this was a local library, and so whenever you saw kids out in the community, they had these little jackets on, so they were real cute and excited to be going into the library. And so it's a couple of views inside. So now we're at one of the presentations, because, you know, I had a lot of time to myself, as I would say, but this man is Lars. He is the head of counseling. So these symbols that he's showing, he is talking about the different groups that this represents around the country. And I followed that as best I could, but it was a very interesting presentation. And I will say that he told me that, so let this kind of sink in, that he has 10 psychologists, he had 1 psychotherapist, 1 social worker, 2 psychologists that are in each center around the country, and there are 5 centers in the country. So that's not a lot for the need that has been described that's out there, and they get that, they know that. They have 12 counselors that see 3,500 students, and that's with a waiting list. And they told me that those numbers are much better than what they've seen in Denmark. So they know there's such a need for counseling. There's an outcry for that, but having the capacity to reach that need has been very difficult. These are members from the counseling center that I met, and it was really a wonderful opportunity hearing about the guidance center, learning how they come together, the barriers that I mentioned, you know, that they know they need to expand services. In fact, they mentioned to me that in the settlements, some of the teachers are just people who live there that are trying to do a kindness to even teach. They don't really even have any kind of credentials to be teaching. But they also perform the duties of guidance counselors. Now, it's not to be confused with therapy. So you have people out in those communities trying to do good, to fill a need and a void, yet don't have any kind of the expertise to be able to do that. They're just not qualified. I put this in because we would never, the picture on behind Lars, I just thought I'm going to toss this in because in our country, good, bad, or indifferent, whatever, you just don't really see this kind of a picture in an office or in a meeting area. So I don't know, it gave me a little chuckle. I hope it does you too. So this was interesting. This is also still part of the Guidance Center. And as I was reading, I read that there would be real terms of endearment to call someone fatty. Now here, if someone called you fatty, it would not be, you would not be happy about that. I was so glad I read that because when this woman introduced me to this man, she introduced him as Uncle Fatty to me. And I can't imagine the look on my face if I had not been a little bit prepared, you know, for that. But anyway, it was, you know, culturally it's just a little different, right? Then I was on to be able to tour the other schools. So this school setting, I don't remember if they did start out children very young. I don't know if it was considered a preschool or a kindergarten, like we would have here, but this is where the students would go up to 10th grade before either doing nothing that they feel like far too many do, or go on into the GUX. So part of what they wanted to see was to really look at the American model of students going and switching their model to students staying in school until grade 12 to try to keep them there longer so that they could then provide some sort of vocational training or some other opportunities for them. What I learned is that in Sweden, you are lauded if you are a plumber or if you do a job like that. But in Denmark, not so much. They really value your education, whether you're doing anything with it or not. Just the fact that you are educated is a huge deal for them. So Greenland is trying to kind of meet that in the middle. I mean, if you are educated, let's have that have a purpose, so to speak. So I had a really good time here as a former teacher and just an all-around school person. It was a lot of fun. These little children were so cute. They were in their snow gear and they were sliding down this hill for recess. This was a birthday wheel they had in the school. They have every student's picture with the month that they were born in and then the day listed under their picture. And so it was really a nice way. And at Street School, we like to acknowledge that because so many of our students, nobody else is. And I thought this was a wonderful kind of thing to share and that we could even take back and do at our school. I kept this picture in because I thought Elvis lives. It doesn't matter where you are around the globe, but there he is back on that wall. This was a good example. They have parenting classes there. And in this model, it's the hand, and it's kind of the hand of the parent. And it's really talking about how you use your hand to guide children, not to be punitive or, you know, to hit, but in ways and caring ways that you can deal with your children. Now, they have that available for students that have children and then the parents of students they want to involve. They have a kind of a high, I wasn't really able to get a good grasp on it, but a lot of unemployment. But they still have a really hard time, much like we do here, getting parents in for some of these programs that they have. But they are really working toward that. This was a schedule, and this was a student schedule. And I told them, if you don't take anything else away from us, think about how you schedule these kids, because I got overwhelmed and anxious when they were, and I'm not overwhelmed and anxious kind of person, but just listening to this would change every day. There was something, not like we're going to do this in math today, but it would be, here's a class, here's a class, here's a whole other class, and then tomorrow is something different. Next week it's completely different. it was, to me, so disjointed that I don't know how they ever accomplished really anything in school. It was overwhelming to see. This was such a fun class. This class were English language learners, and they were really cute. And so they wanted to, some were a little standoffish, the older ones, and then some of the younger ones, like this student in the gray, wanted to come home with me. It was real interesting, but anyway, they wanted me to show them where I live, and I was showing them where Tulsa, Oklahoma is. They wanted to know so much. They wanted to know if I knew President Trump, and they wanted to give me their opinions about Trump. And nobody was helping me with this. I thought, well, let's throw some religion in too while we're at it. And so they wanted to know if I knew President Trump. And I said, I don't know President Trump. I certainly know who he is. And I was thinking of it from a child's perspective. Do you know this person, and why not? And trying to explain that with some of the language barriers and that sort of thing. And then they asked me how big the place is where I come from, how many people live there. And so I asked them, I said, well, who knows how many people live in Greenland? And so they told me, 40 some odd thousand. And I said, well, where I live at the school, there are 40,000 students that go to school in my town. And that was the best way I felt like I could explain it. And they were silent. I mean, it was, just trying to gather the vastness of that. So later I started thinking about this, and I was talking to some of the folks there about that conversation, and they said, well, they see the politicians here. They see our premier at the store. They see everybody. And I thought, well, that makes sense then that they would ask me, don't you know President Trump, or why don't you know him? Why don't you see him, kind of thing, because that's the life that they have. This is outside of one of the schools. You could see that they leave all of their cold gear outside of the classroom, their shoes and all of that. I just thought this floor was interesting. It was pretty common to see, so snow and sludge could go through for the design of the lives that they lead there. So now I'm moving on to the GUX, or gymnasium as they call it. Why gymnasium, I don't know. But students attend 2 years prior to going to college. So it would be like, if you, for lack of better words, 11th and 12th grade for us, but they don't look at it like that. They look at it that you were here at the GUX. So they have difficulty with youth completing at the GUX, excuse me, because they integrate from small settlements. And if you think about that, you've lived in a settlement where everything has kind of been done for you by a parent, and there are 300 or maybe even 1,000 people there. Now you've moved in to this city, the 17,000, and you're on your own, and you're taking care of your own things for the first time, how difficult that would be. So they sadly have a real issue with suicide at these GUXs too, as well as in the settlements. They said that students often will miss home. They worry about their siblings that are left in abusive situations. They haven't had access to good teachers prior to coming here. As I mentioned, those who teach in settlements often do it as a kindness, but they just have few skills to really prepare students for beyond. Once they get there, they learn pretty quickly because they're bright kids. But there's also systemic issues within these families. So some of the systemic issues would be suicide. I was told of a boy that they were watching because his father, his uncle, and his brother committed suicide, just kind of wham, wham, wham. And then they were concerned that he would feel that that's what he needed to do. And so they were watching him. Well, in the meantime, there was a young woman there who they weren't alerted to anything in particular happening in her life, but she did commit suicide. And that principal was obviously still dealing with that because he, without going into the details anyway, he was kind of on scene for that. So it's a lot, it really is a lot that's going on there that's happening, and it's sad for sure. So that's a little sign for the GUX. These are some of the residential apartments for the students that attend the GUX. So they're young, they're really the age of our 11th and 12th graders living on their own. This was a demonstration, a silent protest that the students at the GUX had, and it was regarding the suicide awareness. So I know this picture seems kind of odd and late probably in the slide, but nonetheless, and of course there's me on the right, but Luna Mueller, and at the time she was Deputy Minister of Education, Culture and Church, and then this is Paul Kleetgaard, and he was a project manager for all of the work groups that were working there. And so Paul's the one that picked me up and delivered me to the airport, and Luna was certainly there, and she took me to the Coffin Mick and toured me around town. Luna has a real interesting history. You know, she is a Greenlandian person. The man in this picture in the plaid shirt was her father, and he was the first Minister of Education in the 70s. So in the late 70s, even though Greenland is still part of the Kingdom of Denmark, and Denmark likes that because it keeps them as an Arctic country, if you will, but they have governed themselves since the early 70s. And I think I said late 70s, but I meant early 70s. And that's where, you know, kind of Greenland is Greenland, but Denmark certainly provides financial assistance and those kinds of things. But her dad also designed the Greenlandic flag that Bob had posted kind of with this event, that's the red and white. And so she's got a lot of history with that community for sure. So here is their premier, Kim Kielsen, and he was there with Doris Jacobson. Now Doris also came to Oklahoma. She was the former education minister, and now she's a parliament member. And so we visited as best we could. Now Kim Kielsen, their premier, which is like a prime minister, he speaks Greenlandic and Danish, but he doesn't speak English. And which tells me that perhaps he was educated in a Greenlandic school. But I also know through reading about him that he wants to keep that part of himself, Greenland, for, I'm sorry for my lack of better words. I've probably said for lack of better words way too much. This is me peering in on Parliament in action that day, which was pretty interesting to see. And this was my one glimpse, and not a great picture, of the Aurora Borealis. And I told them, if I have come all the way to Greenland and I don't get a glimpse of the Aurora Borealis, I am not going to know what to think about that. So that was really nice to be able to see a little bit of that. And they called me and said, go out and look. And it was the coldest. I took my gloves off to really manipulate my camera, and I was, I mean, really chilled to the bone. I just have never been quite so cold. Anyway, now I'm getting ready to leave Nuuk. Here's a glimpse of the airport, and of course, as you would expect, it's very small. The gates, if you will, terminals, the waiting area, and then the Air Iceland. We flew back, and they have these cookies everybody talks about, and they just pass them around in this little basket. It was so just all open, you know. It was really quite quaint, and they were really good. Some of you listening may have flown over the Arctic Circle. I had never done that. I know sometimes people flying to Ireland might have that opportunity, but they told me, I'll just tell on myself, because they said, oh, you'll be flying over the Arctic Circle. And I thought, I wonder how I'll know. And then as I saw it, I thought, oh, duh, I guess so. There it is. But anyway, so some views of the Arctic Circle. It was just spectacular. What an opportunity. And then back in the United States, and there I am. So I hope I didn't hurry too much through this. I had a lot of slides. There was a lot of interesting other kinds of things. I mentioned food earlier. I didn't try any of the fish pudding or any fish paste or anything like that, even though I'm a fish lover. But it was really a great opportunity to meet people there, to hear about the change they want to make, the impact they want to make on their citizenry, and to try to really help these families and youth to be able to succeed, you know, and go forward. So anyway, that concludes my slideshow. Thank you very much.
We really appreciate your taking the time to share that. Does anyone have questions for Lori? If so, you can get them into the but I must give you a couple of questions from TGAs. Are there any similarities or differences that struck you between Greenland and the United States? I know there may be a lot of them, but maybe one or two things that just stood out?
Oh gosh, you're making me stretch my brain way back. I think that, to me, I'm thinking of it not so much on a huge political level, but in a way as I think about schools and I watch these people who are so caring, like the people here, and how much they want their students to have, and they want them to be able to succeed, and they want to do things differently to be able to help them, and to feel that they have such barriers that they have to overcome. And I think that certainly we have those kinds of similarities in that, you know, and I felt like too that they were apologizing for a couple of the facilities that I saw. And so I thought, well, there's a real idea about what things look like and are like here. And so I told them that while there are many wonderfully beautiful new schools and facilities, there are many that are older, and there was nothing there that I saw that really needed to be apologized for particularly, but, you know, just kind of thinking about probably what your ideas of America are, that kind of thing. You know, I think that, to me, what binds us together in the world is that we want the best for our youth and families. We want to have a well-educated community. We want people to be mentally healthy, and kind of finding out how to help them get there.
Are you still in contact with anyone that you met in Greenland, or have they reached out to you since you were there?
I not as much. I did send some information. I talked to them about, I don't know how familiar anybody that's listening is with the ACEs studies regarding trauma. And I sent back some information because they were very interested in that and they weren't aware of it. And I told them that they could go to the World Health Organization and find some information out quickly. But then I did send some information. I sent some to a fellow. I don't know if he received it or not. We were, you know, I had his email address, but there's so much turnover. You kind of wonder if somebody's still there or not. But I also sent it to the project manager so he would have it available. And then through the, you know, through Facebook, Luna and I certainly stay in touch, or through LinkedIn with a couple of others. And
Luna, interestingly enough, is one of the few people I know that's actually visited Tulsa twice through the International Visitor Leadership Program. Once in
I didn't know that.
Then in 2017 again. Well, Lori, we thank you very much for taking the time to join us today, and we thank you for representing Tulsa and Oklahoma and street school so well as a citizen diplomat in Greenland, and at street school through hosting all the international visitors that you do.
Well, it's great. As I mentioned to you, it's a wonderful experience for our students to meet people, and it's a real eye-opener with some of the visitors and some of the issues that they have. And typically when they come to street school, they really want to talk about the dropout issue and our counseling program, because there are just so many students in need, you know, around the world, kind of those same stories.
Well, we also want to thank everyone that joined in today. And if you enjoyed this event, please follow Tulsa Global Alliance on social media. We now have a YouTube channel as well, where this will be posted within a couple of days, or subscribe to our newsletter or our website for news about future programs. So thanks again, Lori. Thanks to everyone, and please have a good day and stay safe.
Well, thanks to Tulsa Global Alliance too. Do great work, Bob.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you. Thank you.